Are you an early stage founder revolutionizing the future of retail? Then you're in the right place. My name is Shah, and I'm an angel investor investing at the pre-seed and seed stage in retail tech, e-commerce, marketplaces, and consumer. I'm also the founder of Retail X Series, an ecosystem to help early stage founders in the retail and consumer sectors. Retail X Series includes events, a YouTube channel, a Slack community, resources for founders, and this podcast. In this podcast, I interview founders, investors, and experts in the retail space, and we dig deep into the tactics around key topics that early stage founders want to hear about. Welcome to the Retail X podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Retail X Series podcast. I'm your host, Shah. Today's episode is all about building a B2C marketplace. Our guest today, Jaclyn Grauman, is the CEO and founder of the Verticale, a social shopping platform that enables customers to discover brands that align with their values. Jaclyn will talk more about her journey, the lessons she learned while building a marketplace, and the pivots along the way. Welcome to the podcast, Jaclyn.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have this discussion. There are a lot of Retail X community members building marketplaces, and I think they're going to learn a lot today. So let's get going.
Awesome.
So let's start with your background. Tell us a little bit about you and your background before we get into the specifics of the Verticale.
Absolutely. So I built my career in the fashion industry, working in brand strategy, public relations, and influencer marketing. I have always really cared about why people shop, where they shop, and being a part of building that emotional connection between consumers and brands and products. And was in that space in a time that was really interesting, where we were seeing the shift away from print toward digital. Influencer marketing was really new, and there was even a lot of resistance within the fashion industry, and was able to get into that and build some really incredible programs around digital and the creator marketing space. So that was my background, and I, as a consumer, became enamored by the rise of, I know we're not using the word direct to consumer anymore, but with this new generation of brands that were putting their ethos and their stories at the forefront, and absolutely loved it, but quickly found that I couldn't see through the proliferation of brands as a consumer myself to be able to effectively shop them. And so I set out to solve that problem and to make it easier for consumers to discover brands that they love and that also align with their values.
And that's the perfect segue into talking about the Verticale. So you describe it as a social shopping platform. So tell us more about what that means and how you're using those words.
Absolutely. So at the Verticale, we are focused on redefining values-driven shopping and helping consumers discover brands they wouldn't have otherwise heard about. So when it comes to social shopping, we are focused on fueling a conversation that drives engagement through video. And we're doing this by bringing founder stories to the forefront, consumer stories to the forefront, like leaning into the why behind conscious shopping. And that really helps us. We see that as the core way of overcoming customer apathy and driving a real movement around this and meaningful change. And users aren't just coming to us anymore to buy something. We can talk about that and get into the pivot a little bit later, but they're coming because we're building an ecosystem that makes them want to discover and engage. And so when we use the word social shopping platform, what we mean by that is a platform that really is merging your shopping behaviors, being able to go by category, by product, but also, and having that style authority built in where there's trust, but also making it social through video. So you can really think of it as a curated experience that is socially driven. And we have a huge community aspect as well. And that layers in social proof and also just gets people excited about changing the way that they shop.
I love that. So that is what the Verticale is today. And you already alluded to this, but how has that evolution happened since your first iteration? Because you did mention that you've been through a pivot.
Yes. So it's an interesting one because core problem of that we're solving, which was my problem as a consumer initially, and that same problem that we're solving hasn't changed. What's changed is the way that we're solving it and the platform through which we are solving it. So we were previously an e-commerce marketplace. We had dropship on our platform. So single cart checkout. You would come, shop multiple brands, We've always worked with really phenomenal brands. So you were able to shop, we were focused on cross-selling, and we've moved away from that for a few reasons, which happy to dive into, but we really saw that our consumers valued us as a place of discovery and that they also didn't want to be disintermediated with the brands in the end when they're checking out. And because they were coming to us for discovery, we saw that as an opportunity to really flip where we were focusing our energy as a business, also shift our business model and lean into that really heavily because that is something that we're doing really well.
Amazing. So we're going to get into kind of each of those pieces.
Yeah.
But before we do, I want to start to talk about the marketplace model in general. So marketplaces are really hard to build, right? Everybody knows this because you have to build both the supply side and the demand side at the same time. And a lot of times the supply side is easier to build. The brands want more access to consumers, so it's easier to get brands on board, but much more difficult to get the customer acquisition for a marketplace. You see brands have customer acquisition problems. The marketplaces that have those, I don't know, we're not even calling them DC brands, but new brands, they have that same problem. So you've learned a lot of lessons through this process of customer acquisition. Can you talk a little bit about how you've evolved that over time and where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that something that we're really focused on and in the way that we're using community, which is starting off with creators and tastemakers, but will also expand to super fans and everyday users as we grow and evolve. And we see that as a really meaningful way of getting the word out on our platform. So some ways over time and some ways that we are testing out is using our creator community to drive their niche audiences and traffic to our platform to see the brands and products that they're recommending. And so that's a big piece of it. And we've historically always done really well with email marketing. We have abnormally high open rates on, we have a weekly newsletter that is really popular where we deep dive into conscious shopping, how brands are doing things differently, like interesting information for our consumers, but then also recommended products. And so that's always worked really well for us. And we use that as our main source of driving repeat behavior to the site. And so that's a big focus for us. And then of course, as a discovery platform, SEO is a focus, will continue to be with our new platform. We see new ways of how we can lean into that. But yeah, back to your original point, like it is definitely difficult for marketplaces to break through the noise. And so for us, our initial goal is to build a proof point around organic and product-led acquisition to get people so excited about the platform that we're building that they want to refer their friends, that if they're a creator, they want to refer their network and their followers, and starting there and then layering on and building out our marketing channels once we've accomplished that.
Yeah, and that seems like the flip, like the reverse of what many marketplaces start with. They start with ads for the marketplace on social media platforms, which is
Yeah.
not certainly not the way you're thinking about it today.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we've seen in the market that there are marketplaces that close a lot of funding upfront and build this product that really often I think sounds like it's on the cutting edge of technology or of supply chain logistics and sounds like this shiny object to investors and within the market, but hasn't actually been validated by consumers. And so when it comes to both pouring money into building that product, building the assortment, and then to your point, digital ads, I think that, is part of the reason that we've seen a lot of consumer facing marketplaces pop up, make a big splash. It sounds really exciting. Fast forward a year or two later, and it's not exciting to consumers. And it's also not exciting to brands because they've seen that it's not able to like move product or be a real partner over time. And so we see an opportunity to definitely operate differently. I think that seeing like our main goals are, of course, growing and scaling our users on the platform, but also driving repeat behavior. And we see that validation that we've already started getting, which is exciting, to as a way of making sure that we're building something and iterating our way into product market fit so that the consumer really wants what we have.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's an interesting approach for marketplaces versus brands because you've done a lot of things that feel more like an iterative approach. And one of those is the way you've stayed close to your customers, and which I don't really hear a lot of marketplaces doing. But you've really used consumer feedback to drive some of the business decisions you've made, including some that are involved in the pivot, as we previously discussed. So, can you talk a little bit more about how you're doing that and how you're getting that feedback from customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've used our new platform, which just launched, as a means of also getting feedback. So I think it's helpful to have feedback also around the context of a platform, or at least the early foundation of our platform. And so we've started, since launching, a ton of customer interviews. So we're in the midst of our first wave of 50 user interviews. Because we are strong on the email marketing side, we have a highly engaged group. We use that group to drive people to sign up and spend time with us. And we're really excited to see their response. So I have one of our team members who's been leading the one-on-one interviews with customers, and I've joined a couple, but also have held back because I keep being told that people aren't willing to be as honest and give the same type of feedback when the founder is in the room. So those ones, but I'm very close to what's being said. And then on the other side, because we were focused on community and creators, I've been handling that piece of one-on-one interviews myself, which is a whole different group. And we launched with 30 creators in our community. And so I've been talking to them one-on-one. And that part for me, especially because I know that space so well and it's something I'm really passionate about, has been really exciting. And they've had some phenomenal feedback on how we can partner over time and build longstanding relationships, on how we can evolve our platform, on like where they can create video content that plays into what we're doing, and how we can organize information in a really interesting way. I've been actually blown away by some of these calls and the ideas that people have just been handing over. So that's been really, really cool and energizing, especially because I have that creative mindset and they really know what else is out there. So I also really trust them when they say they're excited about what we're building. That's been a really fun for me to own.
Yeah, that's great. And not just the creators, but going kind of back to the customers, one of the major decisions you made in this pivot based on customer feedback was about drop shipping. So most marketplaces, as you alluded to before, drop ship customers and have a single point of checkout.
Yeah.
You instead, on your new platform, are sending the customer back to the brand, to the individual brand, to check out. So why are you doing that? What was that customer feedback that drove that business decision?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece of feedback was that people trusted us as a place of discovery. When we dug into that, we heard a few different things. One of them being that they were coming to us to find new brands and products. And sometimes they were checking out with us, but sometimes they were also going to that brand's site to compare, make sure that they were getting the best price. Sometimes it was based on an offer code, but not even necessarily, but to make sure that the prices were the same, which they always were, which is funny. But then also, I think more importantly for assortment, to make sure that they were seeing all the product options. So that's one piece of it, is the actual like considerations in making a purchasing decision. But they also went further to say that they really love those, like that kind of one-on-one experience with brands. When we look at brands that have built on Shopify, that have been able to create such a distinct experience around their specific value prop and their specific product category. As a consumer myself, I love that about shopping with these brands as well. It's very different from how you think of a traditional retail brand. And so for us, in going after the consumer who cares about that and wants to engage with this specific type of brand, we started to realize at scale that it didn't make sense for us to be trying to disintermediate the customer from that brand relationship, and really never set out to build the business to compete with our brands in the end for conversion. And so that was the tipping point at which we decided to pivot away from that and look at a different model. And so for us, yeah, so we are a place of discovery. We have already seen users coming back to us to discover new brands and products. And then we're able to send that user over to our brand site as someone who's already really highly engaged, interested in their brand, interested in their mission, and let the brand take it from there. And yeah, changing our partnership in that way has been really exciting. It's exciting for brands. Of course, direct to consumer brands want to own the customer relationship. They want to acquire that customer. But our promise to the customer is around discovery, values driven discovery. But yeah, we've seen that already starting to work really well. And it's historically something that you would associate with a traditional media site, but it's also a behavior that consumers are used to on social media. If you think of shopping on Instagram, TikTok, those are predominantly impulse purchases, but it might be an in-app experience, but you're being sent over to the brand site as well. Originally, we thought, oh, we have to have all these brands checking out in one place to have this like convenience that consumers are used to, like Amazon. But actually, when you step back, they're also used to the behavior of shopping on multiple different brand sites. And they really just want that process to be simplified for them in discovering and shopping.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I putting my investor hat on here, I know one of the big questions investors ask marketplaces, particularly in the early days, is how do you not get disintermediated, right? Like, how do you not get the customer who comes to you, discovers the brand, and then never comes back to you? And that's always why investors like a single point of checkout, right? Once you've got that person on your site, do not let them get away.
Yeah.
And you're kind of, once again, flipping the script here and saying, we want to be disintermediated, right? That's part of the business model.
Yeah, I think that totally agree with everything you're saying, and also I've heard it a whole bunch of times. And that's originally how I thought of the business. I think that it sounds really great on paper, but ultimately, if you can't if users don't want to behave in that way, like we want to build something that works for our consumer, like full stop, first and foremost. And when it comes to, there's quite a lot that we can do still in collecting that customers' information. We want them to want to engage with us. That's our focus on being really product led and mission oriented. But yeah, I think it's a different way of looking at our relationship with the consumer and the value that we're providing them. But we still, like I said, many people come to our site, they sign up for our emails, they continue to engage with us and come back and discover. So we see it as more of an advantage. And yeah, definitely a different way of looking at the market. We're definitely shaking up how you would think of a traditional e-commerce marketplace. But I also think that we've seen multiple marketplaces that are curated, that are single cart checkout, that were operating similar, different platforms, different missions, but it's not worked out, right? Like we've seen that multiple times, and I've talked to many other founders that also attempted this. And when we're talking about like consumer facing marketplaces, so I have a lot of reason to believe that model is just not working. And that's my perspective on it. But of course, in an ideal world, sure, you would have that be one aggregator that owns all the data. But I just don't know if it's really realistic to try to build a business that way today.
Yeah, and that leads me to my next point, which is when you just talked about this, about creating that engagement on your site. So if you can create that engagement, then people will come back to you, whether you have single cart checkout or not. So let's talk a little bit more about engagement. So you've alluded to the video content and the creator community that helps you build some of that video content. Tell me more a little bit about how you landed on the strategy for video to create that engagement on the platform.
Yeah. So we know that storytelling is so important to who we are and what we're doing, and also in overcoming customer apathy around conscious shopping. And so leaning into that, the way consumers are digesting information has changed, and they want short form video. They want it in the form of a trusted, coming from someone who's trusted. So for us, our community is curated. They really care and know the brands and products that they're talking about. It doesn't feel like it's just someone random who got gifted a product, but we have them creating content in, again, short form video. And then also what we're super excited about, because what's influenced me as a consumer the most has been talking to founders about why they started their brands and why their missions are so important and what they're doing differently in this space. And so we have also brought founder stories to life on our platform, short form, 15-second answers. I think consumers want to engage with founders in this way, but they don't necessarily want to read like a lengthy about page. They just want to meet the person and be like, oh my gosh, I shop from this brand and the founder's really cool. And I was able to hear that story. And so on our site, it feels really interactive because you can ask them different questions. For the founders, we pre-recorded it. And so that content lives on our site. But it's that type of engagement and interaction, and like very quick ways of getting people to understand the brand story and the story behind the values as well, that we really look at doing like very differently from other platforms that are out there, and just a way that we're trying to innovate on the video front.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think a lot of times when you see marketplaces that have a video component, many of them are like live shopping, right? It's all about the live shopping events and things like that. But you're really using a lot of branded and creator-based content that is more educational and not about having that transaction in the moment.
Yeah. And people don't always want that transaction being shoved down their throat, and they're also going to be more likely to trust someone who's speaking more organically, whether it's someone who's talking UGC and someone talking about using a product, or whether it's a founder talking about why they created it. So absolutely, I think that video is really interesting, and it's easy to make it sound good, but there have been a number of platforms as a consumer that I've gone on and I'm just like, what, like, who is this random person like on video? Like, why would this be engaging? Why would this resonate with me? So it's not just about having video, it's about all of the mechanics and the way that it's curated and delivered to the consumer. But yeah, I think live shopping is really interesting when you're a huge company with a ton of traffic. Otherwise, I I think it's really cool, but difficult to compete with doing the exact same thing on a social platform.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe one of the summaries of the last few topics we've talked about, is that you've really made a lot of decisions about the way you're building this platform that are very about the consumer and from the consumer's perspective, which maybe is the big difference, right, between the Verticale and some of the other marketplaces that have gone before you.
We are trying. I appreciate you saying that. We are definitely trying. We are definitely trying, and trying also through the user interviews we were talking about before, to just get to know our consumer really well so that we stand out in all of the options and places and websites and platforms that they could go to shop today.
Great. That's amazing. Okay. So I have one more sort of big topic that I want to go into, because I think we need to talk about fundraising. Fundraising for marketplaces is so hard. And then let's not even talk about this fundraising environment that we're in right now in May 2023. That's a whole nother can of worms and a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
But you've been really scrappy. You've raised a pre-seed round. You've raised a little bit more to pivot. Can you talk a little bit more about your fundraising journey as a marketplace? I know this is a huge topic for the RetailX audience, because I think marketplaces can be hot for a while with investors and then not hot. And then every investor's gotten burned on a marketplace, so that maybe they don't want to look at any more marketplaces.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear the founder side of that story.
Oh my gosh, 100%. Marketplaces are not for the faint of heart on either end, on the founder end or the investor end, I can imagine as well. We have been incredibly scrappy over and over again as a business. We've raised over $1 million to date. And for us, it's really been about finding those early believers in predominantly angels, family offices. We were also in a tech accelerator, an entrepreneurs roundtable accelerator, which has been great for us and also helped us find some of those people. And I think that it's, as an early stage marketplace, like we basically have gone back and forth between bootstrapping, fundraising, like it's not necessary. It's been different every time and it's evolved, and what we're doing and our platform's really evolved. But I think that it's difficult to build a marketplace for sure when you're operating in that way. What it has forced us to do, though, is, to your point, really get to know our customer well. It's forced us to be really scrappy. It's forced us into a situation where, like, we've never thrown a ton of money into marketing, and you get to see, first of all, how tricky and like cannibalizing to the business it can be, because it's really easy to use those things to cover up and to grow quickly as a marketplace, to cover up a product or a platform that people don't really want. So I think that it's something that we've really used to our advantage. And I would say that the people, and there are a select few of our investors, have just been like so incredibly supportive, like huge believers in the company, believers in the pivot. And those types of people are like the ones that have been the most helpful for us. And I think we've raised from some VCs, but we haven't raised like an institutional round. And I would rather come in it as a marketplace, having achieved and iterated our way toward product market fit before going down that path. I think it would be in the best interest of the company and the future of the company to not be, I think that's a really difficult thing to do at an early stage as a founder, and have your vision be able to get out there in the way that you intended it to. Yeah, I think it's an interesting time for sure in the market, in the consumer space especially. Yeah, for us, it's about getting people that are really excited about that vision and the long-term play, and also our team today.
That's really helpful and a great perspective. I think one of the things you talked about earlier, which is throwing a lot of money into marketing, getting scale and size really quickly, is one of those functions of a big institutional round, right? That is the expectation. And when you, in some ways, when you don't have that big institutional round yet, you can really do this iterative process and really figure out what you want to build, which it really sounds like you're certainly going in that direction, where there are things that you really care about on this platform, and you're building them.
Yeah, and it's nice to have we look at everything from a consumer perspective. We look at performance. So we definitely never want to be that founder that's chasing a vision that's not looking at like how people are actually perceiving it. But at an early stage, it's certainly a mix of what you're learning and also gut instinct. And I think have the creative freedom to be able to get even the early workings of what something's going to become out in the world in your own way is really powerful and game changing as far as setting the direction for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we're just about out of time, but I have one more question that I'd love to get your take on, which is, we've talked about a lot of things here, but what's the kind of one other piece of advice you might give founders as they're building out a marketplace company and kind of starting at the very beginning?
Of course. So I actually got some really good advice recently that I wish that I'd gotten earlier. And I'll take only partial credit for this. And it goes back to knowing our consumer, but I think as a marketplace, it's important to know exactly who you're going after, not just high level. Like, we know our consumers millennial, we know that they're Gen Z, we know that they care, that what they're buying they see as a reflection of themselves. We know generally where they're living in urban cities. Like, I can tell you a whole bunch of things about our consumer, but I think what we're trying to do now is dial really, really deep into more of a customer persona. So separating out, like, are we going really hard after that Gen Z consumer who's into thrifting, who's like buying certain types of products, or is it the young millennial mom who's buying non-toxic, or there are like we've had a mix of consumers, like we're actually pretty split across age groups. So it's easy to say as a marketplace and have this big vision and want to go after something and be building it for multiple different groups, because that's a beauty of a marketplace is over time you do get to serve multiple different customer personas and groups. But the advice that I was given was really to lean into one very specifically and drive all of our decisions around that. So from marketing, from products, from curation, from the way that we're speaking to our consumer, let that steer things, and then also use that to drive virality around the platform, because now you've built something that you're meeting that consumer like so directly where they want to be, that they want to share it with their friends and family. And you can't do that if you're building something for multiple different groups. And that's advice that, I'm leaning into now, wish I'd had sooner, but I think is really important, and it's how we're steering the company forward and will allow us to get to that point where we've really grown and scaled and earned the right as a business to go after other customer personas. But for our initial getting to the first like million users on our site, that is going to be focused on one very specific group. And then we'll be able to rinse and repeat and scale that from there. So that would be the advice that I give founders, is do that really early on. Otherwise, you're going to learn the hard way that I will, just leave it there. But you will learn the hard way if you try to build a marketplace for multiple different groups at once.
I actually love this piece of advice. I think it's great. I think it makes so much sense. I think the temptation with marketplaces is always to go broader, especially in those early days when you see, oh, I have a customer from this cohort, and then I have this other one, and I have this other one. Like, we appeal to everybody.
And we've had that, which is great. It's cool. It's cool to see, but you can't.
Focus on the right customer. I love that. That's a great piece of advice. Jaclyn, thank you so much for sharing your advice and your tips and all the lessons you've learned in building marketplaces on this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And thank you for listening to the Retail X podcast. We'll have another new episode out shortly. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Retail X Series, check out www.retailxseries.com for more information, including recordings of past events. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Retail X Series. You could also learn more about me, find fundraising resources, or submit a pitch deck at www.redgiraffeadvisors.com. Thanks, and catch you next time.